Hey everybody, it is Kellen Nitro from Nitromaniac TV's Wrestling Unlimited, and this is the replacement Nitro's take that you guys voted on over on Twitter for Crown Jewel this weekend. I joined my fellow YouTubers in boycotting the Crown Jewel pay-per-view, and just for various reasons. You can go back to the one from last year that I did, and just various videos on the channel with my back reasoning for it and such. This one was a overwhelming landslide victory over on Twitter with over, not really 50% of the vote, kind of closer to 46, 47% of the vote from everybody. It is Badd Blood 1997, Badd Blood in your house, WWF Badd Blood in your house, whatever you want to call it, from the Scott Trade Center in St. Louis, Missouri. The date was October 5th, 1997. A very historic pay-per-view in two aspects. There's one hugely negative aspect of it. Of course, this was a day after Brian Pillman was found dead in a hotel room in St. Paul, Minnesota, after a live event that WWF had put on the night before. And unfortunately, Brian was due to wrestle Dude Love on this card. And having heard about it back in the day, I heard about it through friends at school and that stuff, and then obviously from watching the repeats on Monday Night Raw and TSN and so forth, and just kind of reaching out in my circle a little bit. Was shocking, you know, the stories around it that time and that stuff. Obviously, they were talking about, you know, drug overdose and everything, and it ended up being, no, he just had a heart defect, and that's what did him in. But it's the same thing that did in his father way back in the day too. So it was a genetic heart defect, and it was really it was kind of the first real taste of, shall I say, death in wrestling that I experienced as a fan. I think I might have been 12 or 13 at the time or something when the news hit, and you know, that's just one thing. And you know, you kind of think about it for a week back then when you were a kid. Of course, there's no social media, no Twitter or anything to talk about it, or to, you know, and the media coverage is nothing compared to what it is today if something like this were to happen with a bigger star today and that stuff. But it just, you know, it kind of sticks out in the back of your mind and that stuff. And then when you get older, you do back research into the thing and that stuff, and it becomes, you know, just part of this really wild story and just you know, a tragic footnote for a career that was shortened way too soon than it should have been by an athlete that you know, had he, you know, if he had the breaks going his way that a lot of the athletes do in pro wrestling today and that stuff, could be looked more than the most influential cruiserweight born in North America, you know, in the past, you know, half century almost. Like, you know, we could be looking at him in the same way as we look at like a Tiger Mask in Japan or a Jushin Liger or something like that over here. I mean, some people do already, but I think that I don't see Pillman jumping ship back to WCW after Survivor Series if he lives and goes on and that stuff. I think that WWE probably in 98 would eventually migrate him into like a commentary or a manager's role, and we would have heard him on commentary, or he would have been like just a ballistic manager for somebody in WWE. Like, you could put him with, you know, any number of young talents back then and that stuff, and probably elevate them quite a bit. So yeah, it was a deep loss. It was a tragic loss, and they make reference to it on the pay-per-view a few times. So with that out of the way, let's take a look at the positive, historic aspect of this pay-per-view, and that was the very first time that WWF, or WWE, tried the Hell in a Cell concept for their main event. Shawn Michaels versus The Undertaker is the main event in the very first Hell in a Cell match, and it's a ballistic main event, and I think it kind of showcases the cell a little bit, and also in some aspects creates a little bit of, well, false advertising. We'll get to that a little later on, especially for one Mick Foley, but we'll elaborate on that here as we go match by match, and I kind of give you my thoughts. All right, after the show opened and a really awesome video vignette that was produced, WWF had the best video vignette presentations. They still do to this day, but back then in 97, 98, 99, they had WCW beat all to hell over their video presentations for just pumping matches up and hyping matches and so forth going forward. This opening here is actually really good, and it just hypes the importance of the pay-per-view, and then of course the Hell in a Cell match. I should mention that I'm watching the WWF home video version of it, the VHS release. Well, actually a dub to DVD via VHS if you want to get technical, but it is the VHS copy that was initially released in 1998, early 98, I think, or the months after the pay-per-view anyway. Back then there was no previews of upcoming attractions or anything like that, because WWF had just signed the home video distribution deal with Kosh to do WWF home video, as they were migrating away from Coliseum home video. In fact, Survivor Series 1997 would be the last Coliseum home video produced under that company's name and such, before they transferred over to WWF home video for pretty much from, I want to say, December of 97, early 98, with I'm not even sure if Degeneration X in Your House ended up being on WWF home video or not, because I don't recall seeing it on store shelves back in the day. The first one I remember seeing on store shelves and I picked up was Royal Rumble 1998. So I guess starting with Royal Rumble 1998, just by my knowledge, on to today, there's always been a WWF or WWE home video arm that was at one time ran by Kosh. Now I think it's, who is it, Warner Brothers, I think that's the distributor for it or something. I can't remember, because I haven't bought a Blu-ray or a DVD from WWE home video in quite a bit of time now. I think the network kind of stopped that, but yeah, this was something that I was very that we were in a time of change. It was very interesting to pick up at the time. This one and Ground Zero, I should mention that the Ground Zero pay-per-view from September as well were on Kosh home video back in 1997. So I guess those would be the two, and SummerSlam. So I think out of those three, out of that test, quote unquote, test run in 97, those might have been the free releases that were the initial releases that we seen on store shelves chronologically that got released first. But the first ones that I remember seeing in stores was the Royal Rumble 1998, and then the rest of these showed up during the year of 1998 going forward, if that makes sense. Oh yeah, and the pay-per-view theme, the pay-per-view music theme, is Steve Blackman's WWF theme. So, like the first one, the one that they used when Steve Blackman debuted in WWF late 97, early 98. So, production music galore in the opening. Six-man war to open things up, as you have the Nation of Domination with Rocky Maivia, D'Lo Brown, and Kama Mustafa taking on LOD, Animal and Hawk, and they're supposed to have a mystery partner, but they've had some issues with their mystery partners over the past few weeks. The weekend before, in Japan, Vader and Ken Shamrock headlined a All Japan / WWF kind of joint card in Tokyo, and both guys ended up walking away with some pretty serious injuries and that stuff. I think Vader had some rib issues. Ken Shamrock also had some rib and elbow issues off of this match and that stuff, which was kind of more of a half shoot, half, professional wrestling bout. So some of it scripted, some of it not. To the point where Ken Shamrock, who was supposed to be the third man in on this team, is out for this pay-per-view, and Vader's been not moved, but Vader is booked in the semi-main event flag match, so they can't bring him in. So they tried to platoon in Ahmed Johnson on Monday Night Raw to be the third man. Well, Ahmed, unfortunately, the week or 2 weeks before, when Raw had that very historic Monday Night Raw in 1997 at MSG, where Stone Cold stuns Vince McMahon for the first time, and Cactus Jack debuts in that wild Falls Count Anywhere match with Triple H, ended up lacerating his hand on all things the announce desk when he rolled out to take a bump on the outside of the ring. Actually, I think cut the inside of his hand like such, and like such a way where it needed surgery. He was out for a little bit too. He misses, I think, the entire month of December, and I think returns at the Rumble as a participant. But before, like, this is something that knocked him out for a few weeks for sure. So with mystery partners running low, LOD announces they don't need no stinking mystery partner, and it's a 3-on-2 handicap match. So why they didn't book this as such before, I don't know. This is your classic numbers advantage type match. The Nation outnumbering LOD at every opportunity. The real all-star of this match, though, is Rocky Maivia, The Rock. He stands out from everyone, and you can tell that he's just on the precipice of breaking through here. Rocky gets some help from Farouk from the outside. Farouk's booked a little later on in the Intercontinental title tournament final. More on that as we continue. And that allows him to hit the rock bottom. 1, 2, 3. A good opener, but not the best that any of those guys could have or would have. But The Rock would be a star, of course, in 1998. And LOD were starting to wrap up their run a little bit. Of course, they have the feud with the Outlaws in the coming weeks and months after this. And then kind of start 1998 as one of the main teams challenging for the tag team titles. And after May or June of 98, they kind of fall out of title contention and start on, weird storylines with Hawk and draws and everything. And then by 99, they're gone. They're Splitsville from WWF. So we didn't go back to ringside where Vince kind of elaborates a little bit on the information that they got on Brian Pillman's death. And you can tell that Vince is shook a little bit. And this is all according to all the podcasts and the lore and everything around this is they found out day of the show, like almost 0 hour going into the pay-per-view, where they were expecting, they had 2 people late that day that had been late before to shows, and that was Bret Hart and Brian Pillman. And Bret came in and everybody asked, well, was Brian on your flight? What was happening? And that's when Bret's like, no, I came by myself, whatever, and that's just another real, it's a tragic demise for sure. And it's something that gets more, I guess, on the bizarre side the next night on Monday Night Raw with all the stuff with the satellite teleconference, or not satellite teleconference, but the broadcast from Pillman's home with his widow Melanie and everything, just trying to piece it together. It's one of the sadder and, I guess, more stranger elements of wrestling in 1997 is what happened with Brian Pillman and then afterwards. But it's definitely a historical footnote for sure. Vince's exact words after announcing, of course, that the Dude Love Brian Pillman match would not be occurring on this pay-per-view is, "We have scrambled a bit and we have come up with an attraction I think you will appreciate." So instead of Dude Love and Pillman, we get Mexican Minis in the form of Mosaic and Tarantula versus Max Mini and Nova. No, not Nova from ECW. This was a different Nova. I guess Novas were like Storms today in today's wrestling. I think there's probably like in the late 90s, early 2000s, maybe about 16 or 18 different wrestlers that used the name Nova in some variation of it. And that's just like there's like 8 or 10 of them that use Storm now. Lots of good lucha things in this match. It's the crowd is kind of confused and everything, obviously, because of I think the word had reached the crowd at that time what had happened with Brian and everything, so they're kind of confused. But by the end of the match, they started really popping and cheering, especially with Max Mini in the ring. Max Mini in 1997 is fun to watch. His little feud with Jerry Lawler is, and not a pun to be made there at all, but on WWF programming and such, is one of the most hilarious aspects of 1997 TV on either company's side. It's very funny. Mini gets a pin on Tarantula with a Maestral Cradle of all things, which is a very Mexican lucha libre version of a small package, I find. And 1, 2, 3, and kudos to Mike Chioda again. the minis are quick, and he kept step with them all through the entire thing. Like, he is just, this guy worked his butt off in this match as the ref. Like, I'm watching this, I'm like, dude, get this man some water stat as soon as this thing wraps up. After that, the music hits, and Sunny comes to the ring, and of course this is Tammy Lynn Cinch in about 1997 or so. So, as Conrad Thompson would say, she was roll tide. She was, definitely the hottest woman in the company at that point. She comes out as a special guest ring announcer for the WWF Tag Titles match between the challengers, the Godwins, taking on the champions, the Headbangers, who won the title at the previous month's In Your House, Ground Zero. And kind of a shocking surprise upset. And they actually got a lengthy run with the tag straps. A 1 month run back in 1997 is considered a lengthy run. It's not a transitional run by any means. In modern wrestling vernacular, a month is a lifetime. So Godwins had dropped Hillbilly Jim as their manager earlier in the year, and they had picked up Uncle Cletus, who is Tony Anthony, Smoky Mountain Wrestling's Tony Anthony, otherwise known as TL Hopper in WWF circles and that stuff, the wrestling plumber. And this is a capper of a strange opening hour. Due to the Pillman news and the situation, you've got a tag match that opens, followed by a minis tag, then a WWF tag team title match. So obviously this is not by design. This is not what they had drawn out. If everything had gone to plan, it would have been, the 6-man tag, that it was going to be a no disqualification match between Dude Love and Brian Pillman, with Goldust handcuffed at ringside, I think. I guess they were working on because this was still the Goldust, Marlena, Brian Pillman love triangle storyline and that stuff. But that match stipulation was kind of more, I guess, bringing in elements of Memphis into it and that stuff. But obviously, because of what happened with Brian, that didn't happen. And so that gets pulled. So again, tag match, and it's a weird opening hour. The Headbangers are actually very underrated as a tag team. I find their double team moves really good. They're almost Midnight Express-like, so you can tell who their influences were for sure. The crowd, though, seems kind of dead, though, during this, and they kind of seem dead after the opening match. There might have been an announcement in the crowd about what happened to Brian Pillman or something, or an announcement to the crowd about what happened with Brian Pillman or whatever after the 6-man tag, because the crowd just is really dead. And after a smattering and a big pop of what Max Mini was doing in the ring and that stuff in the minis match, they really don't hear too much from it. The Godwins grab the 1-2-3 after the Headbangers miscommunicate on a double team, and then the Godwins lay out the Headbangers post-match. They are the kings of the tag team division at the moment, and they'll hold the belts going into November. And the formation of the New Age Outlaws with Road Dogg and Billy Gunn happens shortly after this pay-per-view, I believe. I think over the month of October and November, and then they eventually wrestle away the tag straps, I think either prior to Survivor Series or just after Survivor Series in 97. And we just keep pushing on that vernacular, and like I mentioned earlier, the LOD gets involved, and all of a sudden the tag team division is kind of restored a little bit going into 1998. We didn't get a replay of a vignette detailing the exploits of Stone Cold Steve Austin leading up to this pay-per-view. Austin is still, quote-unquote, medically suspended from competing in the ring going into this pay-per-view due to the neck injury, and that's suffered in the SummerSlam match with Owen Hart. And this, was the main storyline because he was legit hurt, and they were checking things out and that stuff, and he holds off on getting the surgery until about 2000. That would or 99, 2000, late 99, early 2000, that would fix his neck up and everything. But this was amazing in hindsight because he is preparing to go on the run of his career at less than 100%. Yes, you go back to 1998 and into early 99 and that stuff, and all those matches and that great feud with Vince McMahon and everything happened with Steve having a compromised neck. So, kudos to him going forward with that. And man, it just is Stone Cold's a Superman. He's a freaking redneck Superman. So right after the video wraps, Michael Cole is in the back just kind of giving a rundown of how the IC tournament shapes up and what the final round shapes out to be. Farouk versus Owen Hart later on in the pay-per-view. And Owen interrupts, says basically he wants Stone Cold away from the IC tournament finals. He's tried to talk to WWF management to get Stone Cold barred from the building, to no avail, but these pleading out one last time to Commissioner Slaughter, saying, please ban Stone Cold Steve Austin from ringside. We don't even want him presenting the belt like he's supposed to do in this match. So we didn't get a very interesting segment where JR comes out, Jim Ross, and he introduced a bevy of legends that are in attendance. Now, St. Louis is one of the most successful and legendary and historic wrestling cities in North America. And the list of legends that had wrestled under Sam Mushnick's NWA promotion back in the 50s, 60s, and into the 70s is like a Hall of Fame. And this was the catalyst of what you see now with your modern Hall of Fame ceremony. So this is kind of like a 1997 Hall of Fame induction, except these guys were just being recognized for their help in building St. Louis wrestling. But the crowd popped huge for this segment. They love seeing all these legends come back into the ring and do things. It was great. They did something similar to this at Over the Edge in 1998 in Milwaukee, where they brought out a lot of the old AWA guys from back in the day, the Crusher, the Vachons, Dick the Bruiser, guys like that. And that ended up, or between those two segments, I think kind of became the genesis for a few years down the road, the relaunch of the WWE Hall of Fame over WrestleMania weekend and what we see now. But the legends that are introduced in order of appearance, Gene Kiniski, Jack Briscoe, Dory Funk Jr., Harley Race, Terry Funk, Sam Mushnick, and Lou Fez. And the crowd is, just hot, like standing ovations and just cheering throughout the entire segment. So it went over big. Sam Mushnick seemed especially happy, really cool to see. And yeah, that's all what that segment's like. But it's still a really cool 20-minute thing on the pay-per-view. It's kind of quirky, but a lot of fun. So the Intercontinental title tournament final was next between Farouk, the leader of the Nation of Domination, aka Ron Simmons, taking on Owen Hart, one of the key members of 1997's iteration of the Hart Foundation. So you have kind of faction warfare here, but here's the cool thing about it: the factions do not get involved in this match. They actually have a legit, straight up wrestling match, and it's I've hazard to say it is before the Hell in a Cell match happens. It's match of the night on the card. Now, when that Hell in a Cell match happens, it's a show stealer, of course. But this is the dark horse candidate for match of the night, in my opinion. This was the tourney to crown the new Intercontinental Champion after Steve Austin was deemed unfit to wrestle and that stuff. So he had to vacate the belt. This tournament took over, I think, about 3 weeks on Monday Night Raw, because they just took 8 of the mid-card guys and put them in matches and that stuff. And, of course, through the blender of it all and everything and so on and so forth, and the whole tournament going down through brackets, we get Owen Hart taking on Farouk in the final. And just a side note here, Owen looks absolutely upset going to the ring, like a little choked up and everything, obviously with the announcement of the death of Brian Pillman and that stuff just hours before. Kudos to Owen for making this appearance and that stuff, and actually delivering this type of match with Farouk. Like, both these guys, once the bell rang, no one could touch them. This was just a great match from bell to bell. The only drawback actually I got from this match is, but it takes away but also adds to this match is quite a bit, is there was a stipulation where Steve Austin had to present the winner of this match with the Intercontinental Championship belt. So Steve Austin walks out with the IC belt, and he sits at ringside with Sergeant Slaughter, but not for very long, because while this match is going on, he starts going on a tirade and starts throwing stuff around. He interrupts commentary, he's stealing headsets, he's breaking in on different commentary feeds, because, you know, your classic WWF announcer lineup, you got the English announce desk, then you got the Spanish announce table, and so on and so forth down the line, right? And the French announce table at this pay-per-view too, all three of them are ringside, right? And so he's just going on down the line and that stuff, and just saying, breaking in on different broadcasts and that stuff. He announces he will be at Survivor Series, which is taking place in Montreal a month later, you know, on a French broadcast and everything. And of course, as we know, Austin would get winner of this match, which ended up being Owen Hart at Survivor Series in 1997. A lot of people forget about the undercard of that pay-per-view because of what happened in the main event, but it's still a fairly decent Survivor Series up until that main event match for an undercard. It's pretty good. And the finish of the match involves Steve Austin. Out of nowhere, Austin just nails Farouk in the head with the IC title belt. When Jim the Anvil Neidhart actually ran down at ringside, and he looked like he was going to distract the ref, but before Neidhart could do it, Austin just pretty much just says, well, screw it, and takes the belt and just smokes Farouk in the head as Farouk was trying to run over for a pin after a maneuver. This allows Owen to get the 1-2-3. The new IC champion is Owen Hart. What is Austin doing? Austin is not defecting to the Harts, is he? Well, no. Austin wants revenge, and he wants his belt back on Owen. So this sets up Survivor Series perfectly in hindsight, and the feud between the three of these guys is one of the more underrated things going into that pay-per-view that we will see for a while. And it's Owen's last heel run in 1997 for a while, because he takes off for a bit after Survivor Series because of the Brett thing and that stuff, and it shows up probably about, I want to say about a week or 2 weeks later on Monday Night Raw in a sneak attack on Triple H and Shawn Michaels after Triple H gets a win, I think, over Ken Shamrock on a main event match on Monday Night Raw, and announces his return as the Blackheart, and this was the catalyst of the Blackheart gimmick. But this is the last of the Hart Foundation days and that stuff in WWF, so kind of bittersweet, but still fun TV to watch. Kind of a filler match next, where we have the Los Boricuas taking on the Disciples of Apocalypse, the DOA, an 8-man faction warfare type match. This kind of stands out like a sore thumb on the card, because wouldn't this be better suited for a month away at Survivor Series? What are they doing here? Typical 8-man showcase. I found that DOA looked good in this one. Again, out of place on the show. Crush gets the pin on Jose Estrada with all things a tilt-a-whirl backbreaker, and JR seems happy by that. A lot of all things, a tilt-a-whirl backbreaker gets the 1-2-3. So, kind of an old school wrestling move after a 8 or 9 minute street fight, whatever the length is on this match. I also have written down there filler meh, and it is. It's kind of the get up and get snacks portion of the pay-per-view at that point. The flag match is up next, where we got the British Bulldog, Davey Boy Smith, and Bret the Hitman Hart, the current WWF champion at the time, taking on the Patriot, Del Wilkes, and Vader. And the new stipulation was added, day of the show. You can win the match not just by grabbing your country's flag, but pin and submission too. So kind of modernizing the flag match a little bit, because I found that the flag match was kind of a WWF invention for Hulk Hogan and Nikolai Volkov in the 1980s a little bit, where, okay, the winner has to grab the opposing country's flag or his own country's flag, or however the stipulations would shake down. I've seen both in flag matches, that I've watched in the past and that stuff. So this is kind of the only one that I've seen that's had kind of a modern twist on it. I didn't mind it at all. The American team of Patriot and Vader got jumped the week prior on Monday Night Raw on the Go Home episode. So the Harts have the psychological advantage, because, again, Vader has the injuries from the matchups with Ken Shamrock, and then the sneak attack on Monday Night Raw. And then Patriot ended up getting wrapped around the post in the figure 4 as well from Brad. It's kind of the same program that they use going into Ground Zero in your house the month prior as well, where they were kind of milking a knee injury or something that Patriot had. So, hey, the psychological advantage was for the Harts, but actually, in reality, 3 out of the 4 guys were walking into this thing banged up because just about a week or 2 prior, One Night Only went down in Birmingham, England, where Davey Boy Smith had dropped the European title to Shawn Michaels in the main event for that card. And during that match, Davey Boy's knee had, or his leg had slipped off a elevated ring that they had set up in Birmingham at the NEC for the crowd there and that stuff, and he kind of wrenched his knee up pretty good, so it's in a brace, so his knee is really banged up going into this one. And of course, Davey Boy would have surgery on his knee after Survivor Series in 1997 before jumping over to WCW in 1998. Kurt Angle's music hits. No, it's not. It's the Patriot. Don't forget, the Patriot was the first one to use Kurt Angle's theme music before Kurt Angle started using that, if that makes sense. That was just an American stock, fanfare type track that they had in their production library that, is better suited to Kurt Angle. Not much of a pop when the Patriot walks out in 1997 with this music. So the match itself starts hot on the outside. The brawl is out of control. I love a match like this. And then finally the Americans grab the upper hand, and we've got an opening bell where they take the ring, and the Hart Foundation has to kind of surround the ring and jump in. And by the Foundation, I just mean Davey Boy and Bret Hart when they kind of jump back in. And we start rolling towards more of a traditional tag team match at that time and more of a traditional tag team flow. This is a phenomenal match, but again, my issue here is another tag team match. Like, this is just loaded to the hilt with tag team matches and that stuff, and I know that it was kind of inadvertent by just adding that extra one, but I think that, give me a single match here somewhere down the line, boys. I mean, we've only had, I think, one singles match this entire pay-per-view up until this point. It's also neat to see Vader in a face role here. He's kind of the man that revolutionized the power heel persona and that stuff in pro wrestling that you would see in the 2000s and going forward. It's quite the treat to see him in a babyface role here with the American crowd. Vader does a moonsault on Bret, but Bret moves out of the way. Vader lands on his feet, though, and for a 400-pound guy at his height, too, of 6'5" or whatever, 6'6", whatever he was, to do that shows how scary athletic this dude was. This was just, it's my favorite spot of the entire pay-per-view. I loved it. And in what Bret calls American Justice, because he screamed it right after doing the maneuver, Bret smokes Vader in the face with a bell. Did not much thought to CTE or post-concussion syndrome back in the day or anything like that with spots like that. But yeah, he does it and then yells out American Justice to the crowd, and the entire crowd just boo. I don't think he was talking about the A&E series with Bill Curtis from back in the day. I think he was talking about getting the upper hand on Patriot and Vader. And I think this match was slowly nearing its finish, but we had a fan jump the rail, and security had to, and you see it quite clearly on the pay-per-view and on the home video copy of it and that stuff. They didn't bother cutting it out. Where a fan jumps the rail and that's it. But they were issuing a situation where Patriot got distracted with what was going on between Davey Boy and Vader at ringside, and Bret rolls up Patriot for the 1-2-3. Obviously, I think the new stipulation was added because 3 out of the 4 guys in this match were hurt, and I don't think that climbing any poles or anything like that for a title or for a flag or anything like that would be, I guess, in their future. We'll put it that way. So they fought on the fly and actually came up with a pretty interesting thing, but I think a no disqualification tag would have served a lot better. I don't think that the flag match gimmick here really did much. We didn't get a chance to take our first look at a completed Hell in a Cell as it lowers from the roof of the Kiel Center in St. Louis to the ring side area and that stuff. The original Hell in a Cell to me is such an awesome structure. The one that Obviously this is the debut of it in 1997. In October 97, the version that shows up at King of the Ring and on Monday Night Raw in 98. And then, going through the Attitude Era into the 2000s, early 2000s. Such an awesome structure. Then it is time for your main event, and we've got The Undertaker versus Shawn Michaels in Hell in a Cell 1. This match still stands up today as a classic. I love the HBK pre-match promo where he's sitting in the back with DX, and he states, "Ain't nobody crazy enough to do this gig but the Heartbreak Kid." I love that quote, and still think back to it from time to time. It's such a great backstage quote and interview quote. HBK makes his way to the ring with the original DX lineup. Don't forget, Triple H, of course, is there with China and Ravishing Rick Rude as the insurance policy. But again, he's going at this alone because with the cage and that stuff, he can't get in. There's a roof on it, and he can't get out because the door's locked. So once he hits the ring, he gets kind of a huddle with his team and that stuff with DX, and then the rest of DX beats a hasty retreat when Taker's music hits, and Taker makes his way to the ring. The first few minutes of the match, HBK is on full ragdoll mode, and to kind of sell the cage and sell the importance of it, it's pure Undertaker offense, and HBK in, I guess, give a crap ragdoll mode is one of the most funniest and amazing things you'll see in pro wrestling from this time. The dude looks like Stretch Armstrong when he's getting bumped around in there. So, however, on one bump to the outside, Michaels is a little unhappy with the placement of the cameraman being right there. We can kind of hear it, some non-PG verbiage coming from his mouth at that point, in which Vince and JR apologize for. So don't forget, this was also the showstopper HBK era, prior to the comeback in 2002. So we still kind of get the bratty Shawn Michaels once in a while here. Michaels attempts a near fall after a few heavy chair shots, only a 2. And then Michaels finally gets to dispatch that pesky cameraman, and he dispatches him with a dive to the outside, and the cameraman's laid out. I think that, again, that was just something that was premeditated as a spot to work in this match to kind of sell everybody on the danger of the cage and to get some psychological advantage or psychological storytelling to get the door open, because once the door is open, to get the cameraman out, and you get the medical crews out there to get him out and everything, the two of them brawl outside and start heading up to the roof of the cage, and then they start doing bumps and stuff on top of the cage. Taker levels Shawn with a couple of clotheslines and that stuff up there, and then they fight to the edge of the cage, and Michael starts crawling down, and then we get our first kind of dive off the side of the cage where Taker basically slams his foot into Michael's fingers, breaking the grip on the cage, and Michaels falls. I want to say probably about 10 feet or so from about halfway. I called it Seth Rollins' height. If you've watched the last few Hell in a Cell matches that Seth Rollins has been into, he's done high spots and that stuff from that height above the floor, not necessarily on top of the cage, but I want to say about halfway to a quarter of the ways up on the cage, through the Spanish announce table, which of course is the trope in pro wrestling. If you have the foreign announce table, it's going to get destroyed sometime during the night. So there we go. The match eventually makes its way back into the ring. HBK continues ragdolling. Taker then nails HBK with a chair, and of course Michaels is ripped open, bloody, you name it. And then the infamous quotes from Vince McMahon hit. "It's all over now. Now will come the tombstone," and then the lights go out, and wait, what? And the first appearance of Kane with Paul Bearer is unveiled to the crowd, and he is introduced to the crowd in a big way, of course, where Kane walks to ringside with Paul Bearer. He rips the door off its hinges to walk in, confronts Taker, does the whole fire thing with his hands, and with Vince screaming, "That's got to be Kane. That's got to be Kane." It's still the best character launch in WWF history for a new character. After months of hype, Kane is indeed still alive, and he's looking for revenge. He tombstones The Undertaker, and that allows HBK to grab the 1-2-3 and a #1 contendership for the WWF title. And of course, as we know, it's Shawn Michaels versus Bret Hart at Survivor Series in 1997. The pay-per-view goes off the air with a beaten and bloody Shawn Michaels getting helped to the back by Triple H and Chyna, and with Kane showing up in the WWF. What does it all mean going forward? My final rating for this pay-per-view is a solid 8 out of 10. My only knock against this is too many tag matches on this card. You got too much of similar or the same type of matches on there. In hindsight, there's too many tag matches leading up to the main event. The main event is absolutely phenomenal. The IC title match is phenomenal, even with Stone Cold running a distraction tactic and that stuff. He got himself over as well as Owen and Farouk. And yeah, just my only knock on this thing is too many dang tag matches. But other than that, I still think it is one of the most classic cards in WWF history. Solid 8 out of 10. A definite watch every year, at least once, and a lot of fun still to watch to this day. Alright folks, later days, happy wrestling watching. I'm Kellen Nitro. Have a good one, and thanks again for voting on this one. I'll put up a poll in November sometime, and we'll do this all again with some November pay-per-views or November-themed pay-per-views going head-to-head for a classic Nitro's take. Later days again, happy wrestling watching, and we will see you here on Nitromaniac TV's Wrestling Unlimited.